Hello, Здравствуйте, and welcome. This is Billy Bigham with the Russian American Business and Culture Council, and today I'm joined by Bernadine Joselyn. Thanks for joining me, Bernadine. How are you?
Glad to be here, Bill. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Bernadine is currently the Director of Public Policy and Engagement at the Blandin Foundation. She spent 15 years of her professional life in Russian and Eastern European affairs, including as a diplomat in Moscow, Russia. Bernadine, first I just want to ask you about the Blandin Foundation.
Yeah, well, I am surprised kind of to find myself living and working at Blandin Foundation in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. Grand Rapids is a town of about 12,000 people in north central Minnesota and a pretty small place. And I actually moved there kind of from Moscow, so it was a huge shift for me. But what the theme that brought me there was my interest in community and economic development, which is a lot of the work I got to do in Moscow. Blandin Foundation is Minnesota's largest rural-based philanthropy, and our mission is to try to strengthen rural Minnesota communities. We try to help them identify their priorities and figure out ways to work together to live into the future that they imagine for their community. So I'm the Director of Public Policy and Engagement, and in that work, right now we're working a lot on broadband because, especially now in the time of COVID, I think more people see how critical a good connection is to being able to participate fully in the economy and in society. So one of the things I get to work on at Blandin is to help small rural places get and use the broadband that they need to participate and be successful in 21st century.
Would that be like Wi-Fi?
Yeah, also, Wi-Fi tends to be more through the phones, and we're interested in wireline connections that'll allow people to have the bandwidth that they need to, be successful in distance learning or working remotely like you and I are doing right now.
Wow, yeah. Seems like you guys are ahead of the curve a little bit with that.
Yeah, it's been very gratifying because it does feel like, people don't, when you ask rural leaders what they care about, broadband is usually not on the list. They list, jobs and healthcare and education and quality of place. But the truth is that everything's better with broadband. I like to say everything's better with better broadband. And so it's hard, but it's a really hard and technical area. And so community leaders often need a lot of support and help to figure out, what they need to do to move from where they are to where they want to be in terms of broadband connectivity.
Okay, interesting. And you, okay, let's transition to talking about the Department of State. You had a career there for a number of years, and you said that you did a similar project in Moscow when you were there. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I went to Columbia University in their graduate program. At the time, I got a degree from the Averill A. Harriman Institute for Advanced Study of the Soviet Union. I wonder what that institute has been renamed now, Billy. You've got me thinking about that. But the School of International Affairs at Columbia University had a program in international security policy. And at the time, in the late 80s, I was, really animated by my concern about nuclear war and the role of the United States in stopping that or, inadvertently making it happen. And so that's how I got interested in international security policy. And at Columbia University, I wasn't really interested in Russia per se, but it pretty quickly became apparent that to do a good job in figuring out America's interests in terms of international security policy, I needed to understand the quote-unquote enemy, right, the big opponent out there, Russia. And what happened was I got kind of seduced by Russian area studies. I loved Russian language. I loved Russian history and literature and the people, and that's what really was the wind under my wings in terms of my studies. I wasn't as interested in circular error probability and throw rate and megatonnage from nuclear weapons studies as I was about Russian culture and history. And so that kind of that marriage of interest is what brought me into the State Department. And I was really just thrilled when my second assignment, my first assignment was to New Delhi, India, where I worked in the consular section. And then I was able to work in the office of what was then called Office of Soviet Union Affairs and get a plum post to Moscow as a junior diplomat. And that was in like 1981. And I then did work as the special assistant to the ambassador, Jack F. Matlock Jr. at the time. And then I worked in the political section as a political officer during the time of the 1989-90 revolution, and it was a very exciting place to be, for sure.
Yeah, I could imagine. So your degree was that fairly technical?
No, it was an area studies approach at Columbia University. They had a series of area institutes, and so I did get so my degree in international security policy was, I wouldn't say that was technical, really political science. Okay. And then it kind of layered it over with a more humanities approach to Russian area studies, so language, literature, history, culture. Sure. That was really the mix that attracted me.
Okay. And what role do you think cultural understanding can play in diplomacy?
Oh, I think it's foundational, absolutely foundational. We're also, prisoners of our own lenses, right? I find that so much, that kind of like fish in water, that you say to a fish, and they say, "What's water?" You just aren't able to even discern it because it's so all-encompassing. And what's so amazing about intercultural and cross-cultural studies and explorations is it allows you to see the water, that it's not a given. It allows you to, when you're suddenly plopped from your own little fishbowl into somebody else's, you can then see in a new way how culture informs the way we think and the way we understand the world and the way we see the world. So there's just been such an important gift to me to be able to see my own culture, American society and history from the outside in a fresher way than when you have no context. My dad would always say, compared to what, and that being able to compare and contrast your worldview, your assumptions, really enriches my experience just as a human being.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard the saying that the U.S. and Russia are like two twin brothers that just won't get along.
Conjoined twins.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So having some understanding would help. How long were you in Russia?
Well, I lived and worked there for most of a decade, but I did shift and switch my roles while I was there. During the time when I first went over, as we talked about, I was assigned to the U.S. Embassy in Moscow as a junior officer, as my second overseas assignment. But at the time, it was still the Cold War, the late 80s and early 90s, and the embassy had a policy, they called it no solo contact, which was meant to protect us from efforts to recruit us, from the foreign intelligence agencies, and they wanted to just protect us to not ever be alone with the Soviets. And it was such a vice script to live in, and just the whole assumptions underneath that the mistrust and it just got to be very restrictive to me and hard to really understand what was, and just build the relationships that I needed to have the understanding I needed when you could never be alone with somebody.
Yeah, it's hard to be diplomatic with that.
Yeah, it really was, and that was a big impetus for me to look around for other opportunities to live and work in Russia and not be constrained by those kinds of that the State Department felt was necessary to protect its diplomats. So I left the State Department, and then I went and worked for IREX, International Research and Exchange Board, and the job there was to help prepare study and learning research opportunities for American scholars who were coming to Russia to do postdoctoral research. And in that job, I got to fly around to all the different archives, many different archives in Russia or Soviet Union that American scholars wanted to access to, and have to go kind of like and negotiate on their behalf access to those archives and get them placed there through that long-standing bilateral academic exchange program that IREX managed on behalf of the U.S. government.
Sure.
And then I go ahead.
Would you consider that track 2 diplomacy, like citizen diplomacy?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And it's been, it's so interesting now to see, these many 20, 30 years later, how that's still the thin reed we have to lean on, Billy, I think, is that person-to-person contact and the commitment to continue, keeping open channels of conversation and discussion and relationship when our governments are not able to have a productive relationship. That's all we got is citizens reaching out to one another.
Sure. Yeah, so you were obviously in Russia at a very contentious time. Do you see any parallels today?
There. So one of the things that I've noticed a lot and thought a lot about is the role of hope in change and cultural change and political change. And the thing that was so compelling and amazing about the early 90s and the period of, perestroika, post-perestroika, and then the collapse of the Soviet Union and the stand-up of a new Russia was how hopeful people were that their efforts could make a difference and that there was a role for them and this was their time. And it was a tremendously exciting and expansive period of revisiting on the part of everyday Ivan Ivanovich their life, imagining their ideas about what Russia was and what it could be, and people reimagining and re-understanding and re-engaging in their own history. So the biggest difference I see today is because I haven't been back to Russia for a long time, so I can't speak from personal experience, but my impression is that cynicism has really eroded hope. And a lot of people who were so hopeful at the opportunity of what a new democracy or reimagining of Russia might be under the vice grip of the Communist Party have really been very discouraged all these years later to see such autocratic rule still characterize what we see in Russia. And that's heartbreaking to me. Hope is hard won and easily dashed, and I think without people, I think that's the biggest promise, really, of America. And what I'd always hoped for about Russia was people feeling like it mattered what they did together, that they could, make change for the better. It was a very exciting time to be part of. And sad to see today so much growing disparity and so much growing poverty in the former Soviet Union.
Sure. What do you think could create more hope today?
I think that where change happens, and this is maybe a lesson I'm bringing now from my years back here doing community economics development through Blandin Foundation and looking in retrospect back at what was going on, that real change happens in local places, in everybody's place. There's a lot of work to be done, and let's just start right here. And, like in the United States today, if you can get pretty hopeless pretty quick if Congress is your yardstick about, progress or change. But if you can redirect your gaze to more local places, cities, communities, that's where real change can happen. Because I think change follows relationship lines at the speed of trust. And it's in local places that people can, in fact, find their handle to make a change. And so when I get discouraged about Russia today or America today, I think that for me, where I find hope is in people in their own place. It's kind of like that Panglossian thing about tend your own garden, right, from Voltaire, that we all should tend to our gardens. And if everybody did that and made their own community, their own block, more hopeful and more equitable, then there's your answer. That's how we get there.
I like that. So sometimes, as a last question on this podcast, I ask people sort of a fun cultural question. So here it is. If you were able to have dinner with one famous Russian author or artist, who would it be? Where would you go, and what would you eat?
Wow, what a fun question. Well, Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin, of course.
Okay.
For me. And I would love to go to Nevsky Prospect. I think there's still, you can, is it the Akademический cafe there right on, oh, come on, what's the name?
I'm not sure. Is that in St. Petersburg?
On Nevsky Prospect, yes.
Okay.
Where he used to go and drink whatever they drank, mead or something.
Yeah.
And that would be my choice. That would be amazing.
Okay.
And I'd love to ask him about time in the Caucasus.
Okay. And anything to eat in particular?
Oh, vodka, of course.
Okay, I like that.
And then what goes with that? Caviar, sure. Let's have the sparkling caviar and the butter and the black bread and some shots.
That sounds amazing. You thought of that answer very quick. I'm impressed.
That's a fun question, Billy.
Okay, well, thanks for joining me.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.